Now, the next story that I'm going to talk about just now is one that I've actually struggled with a little bit, and as a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons why I'm recording today on Friday instead of yesterday on Thursday. A story came my way rather, on Wednesday that kind of necessitated a little bit of thought. And unfortunately, it's one of these things that I don't want to be talking about. I just want to be done with this, but unfortunately we can't. It's another one of these stories about another assault over a masking dispute. Another violent masking dispute, and this one happened right here in Lloydminster. Now, I heard about this one directly from the victim. I've actually gone looking for it. I haven't found anything about it in the news. I haven't found anything about it in any of these Facebook groups, in the Lloydminster area related Facebook groups. Nobody seems to be talking about this one. This one seems to have been kept pretty quiet. And there are some things that I'm not going to do here. I'm not going to tell you who the victim was. I'm going to try to reserve as many of the details as I can so that people don't figure out who the victim was, because they are entitled to some privacy. And there are some other issues involved in this that I will get to, and I don't want to sully this person's reputation either. Now, that being said, there were a few things that I didn't do. I actually contemplated asking for this person's blessing before talking about this story today. And eventually I had to kind of dispense with that. I kind of realized that I couldn't allow anybody to mold the way that I was going to discuss this story here today, because I have to do what's right. And there's a particular way to talk about this story. There's only one way to talk about it that I think would be right. And so the story as it happened, it went something like this, reportedly to me. This is what I was told. Was that this particular individual, he was doing some work in a public place. And he wound up, one way or another, he ends up in a conversation with one of these anti-mask people. And eventually this person goes outside of this establishment. He waits for this person to come outside, and then he jumps on him. Jumps on him, starts beating on him, starts trying to choke him. At this point, apparently he's broken the victim's nose. And so the victim does find a way to get this person off of him. I won't go into those details. Not extremely important by my view, but he does manage to get the guy off, and the guy goes away. So the cops show up, they file a report. The police are out looking for the assailant as we speak, presumably as we speak. I haven't heard anything about an arrest, so I assume that this person is not in custody. I don't know the identity of the assailant, so I can't even share that with you. I couldn't even ask anybody to send tips about the whereabouts of this person if I were so inclined, because I don't know their identity. Now, there are numerous reasons why I've chosen to share this story with you, with or without the blessing of the victim, and I'm going to go into those one at a time. But the biggest one that I want to get into right here and right now is that I want the people who are watching this, who happen to be in the Lloydminster area, to understand that violence over these masking disputes, we can no longer say that that isn't something that's happening here. That is something that is happening here, right here in Lloydminster. It's not just something that's happening in Dawson Creek. It's not just something that's happening in Edmonton. It's not just something that's happening in Ontario. It's not just a thing that's happening in places in the States. It is now happening here. It's now happening in our community, where we all need to find some way to be able to go about our day-to-day business safely. And I do concede that perhaps this occurrence now introduces some doubt into our minds as to whether or not that's actually within our own control. Whether or not we have the ability to go about doing our business safely, because it's entirely possible that some person who is just wound up about this whole masking thing might possibly go out of their way to start an issue over them with you. Seems like maybe that is something potentially that could happen. So violence over the masking, non-masking thing, that's not just a problem that other people have. That has arrived here. Like the virus itself. The virus is not just a problem that they have in Ontario. It's not just a problem that they have in California. It's not just a problem that they have in Edmonton, in Calgary. The virus is here as well, and we do need to be taking our precautions to make sure that we're not getting it. But unfortunately, now the violence is here as well. But now, at the same time, I also have to add a caveat to this. And this is extremely, extremely important. Because while it is possible that this person instigated the thing themselves, and that the victim had absolutely no hand in it. There are other things that could potentially be at play, and I don't know these things to be fact. But I will put it to you this way. I have seen recently on Facebook, I have seen individuals who talk about things like, the sort of things, bragging about saying certain things to the quote-unquote, the non-mask, anti-mask people, whatever it is that you would like to call them. As a matter of fact, I've even seen people on Facebook talking about saying things to anti-mask people like, I hope that it's your family members who are part of the 0.9% who die. That is literally one of the worst things that I could think of that you could say to absolutely anybody. Regardless of whether or not they share an opinion with you or not, that's the worst fucking thing that you could actually say to somebody. If we're all adults, if we are all grown-ups, I think that we should all be able to agree that sharing the same opinion as somebody else should not be necessary for us to not wish death upon people's family members. I don't think that's a very difficult concept to understand. Now, like I said, I don't have every single fact about this situation. I don't know for a fact that anything like that was said during this altercation that happened here in Lloydminster. But I do know that if it was, even though I don't really agree with it and I don't condone it, I certainly understand how somebody could be mad enough to pop somebody in the nose a few times if somebody had told them that I hope your family dies. I don't think that the COVID-19 pandemic is the only thing that would make something like that just an absolutely reprehensible thing to say to somebody. And to say something like that to somebody, I think that you have to understand exactly what it is that you're doing when you say that. You are basically acting as if somebody having a different opinion than you, that somebody who has a different opinion on a particular subject is so morally unworthy that you can say anything that you want to them and have it be justified. And I don't think that's true. You may vehemently disagree with the anti-mask people, and personally I do. I very much disagree with them. But just because you disagree with them, it doesn't mean that they're somebody to whom anything can be said, somebody to whom anything can be done. Having a different opinion doesn't automatically make them some sort of low-status caste to whom the general protections of the general social protections of things as basic as just morality and ethics, who aren't afforded the protection of those things. It doesn't make them that, and quite frankly, I'm just going to come out and say it. These are very harsh words, but I think they're true. I think that if you think like that, then there is something wrong with you, and you need to go back to formula a little bit, and you need to rethink your life. If you say that or anything like that to somebody and they get angry, let me make this clear. Let me make this absolutely crystal clear to you. They're not getting angry with you because you just said something to them that was so logical that their brains can't process it. They're getting angry at you because you just said something that was so absolutely and utterly just morally contemptuous that anger is actually the only rational response to it. They're not the ones who are being irrational. You are. They're not irrational in their anger and their response to that. You're being irrational in the sense that you said a goddamn dumb fucking thing. The kind of thing that shouldn't be said to anybody. And you know what? I wouldn't tell anybody. I would encourage anybody to go out and break your nose over it. And I wouldn't tell anybody to break your nose. And I wouldn't encourage it. And I don't approve of it. But I think I fucking understand why somebody would do that, if that's what went on in this particular case. And it seems to me like that is possible. And somebody who would say such a goddamn shit brick fucking stupid and insensitive and ignorant and vicious and cruel thing to somebody, they might actually think that, because COVID-19 is so dangerous and because the anti-mask people are arguably putting people at risk, and you know what? Arguably they are. That's true. But on account of that, somebody might think that perhaps they're morally justified to say these sorts of things to somebody, or at the very least, that they have what you would call a serviceable excuse. But those people, they're not really thinking through what they're doing. Let me kind of explain to you one thing that this virus is doing to a lot of people. And I'm going to kind of give this to you in a kind of a popular metaphor, right? And so there's something that people talk about where, you take you think maybe along the lines of French cooking. So you have a pot of water, and then you have a frog. And you put a live frog into a pot of water, and then you slowly start to turn the heat up. And slowly over time, that water comes to a boil. And the frog boils. And of course, when the frog boils, the frog dies. And if you have any kind of sympathy for the frog in this situation, well, one thing that you have to understand about how this happened is because somebody made the choice to continue to turn up the heat. They knew what was going to happen. They knew what was going on. Probably seen it with their own eyes at a certain point. But they just kept turning up the heat. And eventually you wind up with a boiled frog. And that's exactly what is going on right now with this COVID-19 pandemic. It's one of the reasons why I keep saying that the way that we are responding to the virus is arguably worse than the virus itself. We are boiling frogs right now, and somebody has to make the decision to turn the heat down. Somebody who thinks that it's okay to tell somebody that they hope that their family dies is obviously not turning down the heat. You say that to somebody, you are turning up the heat. And so who can you really blame? Who can you really blame if at the end of that day you end up as a boiled frog yourself? Because you chose to keep turning up the heat. It doesn't make what the assailant did right. What the assailant did was wrong. Hands down, no question. It is wrong to break somebody's nose. Or rather, I should say that unless you're defending yourself, it's wrong to break somebody's nose. And I think if you're any kind of a moral person, it's not fun to break somebody's nose. And I know because I've done that. I broke somebody's nose in self-defense once. I broke their nose, and then they kept coming at me, and I wound up breaking their jaw, and I feel terrible about it every single time that I think about it. So while I understand how somebody could become so angry as to do something like that, I can't write that kind of action a moral pass. But you know what? Nor can I do the alternative. Nor can I write a moral pass to that other behavior. So I'm going to say this one more time, and I'm going to hope right now that this is actually one last time that I am going to say it. But the way that we get through this pandemic and the things that we do while we are trying to get ourselves through that pandemic, that is on us. It is all on us. These are the things that we are going to have to live with when this thing is over. So we need to stop fighting each other. We need to start cooperating with one another. And I am not here to argue masking, anti-masking. I'm not here to argue with anybody about masking. I'm not here to argue with anybody about COVID-19. I'm not here to argue with anybody about vaccines. I won't do it. But one thing I'm going to tell you is that regardless of which side of this issue you stand on, we have to stop the violence. This has to stop. It has to stop right now. So I'm saying it again, and I'm actually starting to get a little bit pissed off that I have to keep on saying it. But I'm going to keep saying it until somebody fucking listens. We need to turn the temperature down, and we need to start doing the things that are going to get us through this pandemic together. Because we have to come out the other side together, and we all have to live together with the things that we did during this pandemic. And if you're out antagonizing people, actively antagonizing people over this, I think that you're going to have a much harder time with it than the people who aren't. And if you're actually out there hurting people over this, you're going to have to answer, if not to the law, then at least to your own conscience. And I cannot imagine that that's going to be an easy thing for some people to do. And I think that whoever it was who assaulted my friend, I think that they're going to be one of those people that are going to join that particular club. Because at the very least, if nothing else, it is still Christmas. So if you can't find it in yourself, if you are too prideful to change your behavior a little bit if you need to in order to take this temperature down so that we can all get through this, if you can't do that for the sake of the pandemic, maybe you could at least do it because it's Christmas.